Omakase, the life and words of author M. Karen. If this is our first time meeting each other, let me give you a brief introduction. My name is Max. I write books for a living, as you can hear in the sound of my voice. I am healthy again. The cold has once again been defeated. By the way, my pronouns are they, them, and since we are on the month of Halloween, I figured I would share with you one of my favorite Halloween memories. Or I would, had I not been raised in Mexico, and instead been raised on Day of the Dead, El Día de los Muertos. I don't have a lot of fond... Well, that's not... hold up. I have a lot of fond memories of Day of the Dead, but not any that I think makes for a fun story, so instead I'll tell you my favorite thing about Day of the Dead. And that is a special little treat you get to have every year. No, it's not the sugar skulls. Not the chocolate skulls, which are objectively better than the sugar skulls. It is a little delicacy we call pan de muerto, bread of death, or bread of the dead. And it's a very sweet, cinnamony, soft bread. And the thing, how you work the death into it, because there's no death involved other than a section of the bread is placed on top of it in the dough phase, kind of in the form of crossbones. So when the dough rises, it has these kind of like crossbones kind of appearing on the very, very top of it. It's kind of like a nice circular, round, kind of the size of your palm, with crossbones on the very top, which you can detach when you actually purchase a pan de muerto. And that right there is probably going to be my favorite thing. I miss it. I haven't had it in forever. Like, I sometimes go, to, panaderias, Mexican-style bread shops. And you can kind of get stuff that's similar to it, but it just isn't the same. And I don't know why. I just don't understand why sugar skulls and chocolate skulls haven't taken off in the US. What kid doesn't want a skull with their name on them to remind them of their own mortality and to cherish the time they have on their hands right now? Hi there! The name is Max, also known as M. Karen. Yeah, I don't know what other kids internalized from Day of the Dead, but that's the thing I internalized ever since I was little. It's like your yearly reminder that life is fleeting, and that you should not only be the best version of yourself, but you should also cherish what you have, the people around you, and the time we have been giving. Oh wow, we're like 2 minutes in, we're already at serious time. Hi there, everybody. Welcome to episode 17 of Omakase, my writing advice and inspiration podcast, and sometimes culinary descriptions. Man, I feel like I failed terribly at describing what pan de muerto looks like. Just Google it. Oh man, keep an eye out for the question later today when someone asks me how to accurately describe something in fiction, and my answer is just write in the book. Just write, hey, in parentheses, dear reader, just Google this part. Oh, that's bad. Anyhow, hi there. If you're unfamiliar with the podcast, I usually don't have a silly start like this one, but hey, this here is a window into how I write stories, a window into my life, a window into my writing advice, and, of course, a little bit of inspiration along the way. I am going to be talking about my week in the first segment. In segment numero dos, I am going to be going through 2 viewer questions. We're going to be talking about sensitive subjects in fiction, and... Should you? Is that my cat in the background? Oh my god, he's been so noisy today. And the second question will be dealing with your writing versus your editing skill. Should you focus on one over the other? We'll find out in the second segment. And the final segment of the show is the prompt. The prompt is back, and I have an interesting classic prompt titled We Need to Talk. But before we get anywhere, 2 pieces of housekeeping. The song that you hear at the beginning and at the end of the podcast is Dream of Green by the OC Jazz Collective. Link in the description below. Anyhow, my second thing is that there is a link in the description to treat me to a cup of coffee. So if you enjoy this show and Patreon is not your cup of coffee, you can also buy me a cup of tea over at coffee.com/mkaren. Alright, get all the junk out of here. Time to talk about the first segment of the day, my week. What have I been doing? What have I been working on? What have I been writing, editing, reading since the last time we talked? Well, I've had a crazy week. Right here on my notes, I have described myself as a busy bee for the last 7 days, and I can't think of a more accurate description. I've been all over the place, taking care of a lot of crazy things. Because I got so busy with editing, I actually was a little bit late on the writing zine. I make a little writing zine every month for my patrons pledging $10 and up. And you know me, I hate being late. I take pride in always arriving early, always being there on time, always being ready for the task at hand. So being late on this little reward that I have for some of my most generous patrons, that just couldn't go on. So I got that done first. I recorded a podcast, which you heard last week, and then I had a wonderful random encounter of life. As you know, every once in a while, we don't know it, but without realizing it, we reach to the pile of cards, the pile of random encounters, and we draw a card from the top of the pile. Sometimes the top of the pile can be something like, you found $20 on the ground, or you got a letter from the IRS, or your mom just sent you a text, a cryptic text that says we need to talk. In my case, I got a random encounter of life that required me to travel for, what was it, like 100 miles? I forget. I can't do math, that's why I write books. I had to gather my lovely spouse and my brother, friend of the channel, Senor Blakesworth, youtube.com/Blakesworth if you want to check out some amazing animations. But we basically had to do a road trip all the way to Sacramento, California. That's like 3 hours away from where I live. That's a long road trip. All just for a government appointment that lasted approximately 3 seconds. No, you think I'm kidding. You think I'm being silly. You think I'm, being facetious for the sake of comedy. No, it took 3 seconds. I walked in, a lady looked at my document and said, "Yup, that's you." And I'm like, "Yup, why? Why did you guys ask me to travel 3 hours in a particular direction for you to just look at my documents?" But that got done. We had a nice laugh after that. Like, literally, it took Blakesworth longer to find the bathroom than it did for me to get that appointment done. That's how silly the whole situation was. But we made the most out of it. I hadn't been to Sacramento in forever. That city has a lot of trees, and the weather is like 10 degrees hotter than it needs to be. So I was like, yeah, Sacramento is nice. Let's get out of here. On the way down, we decided to hit San Jose. And San Jose is nice. I mean, I go there every year for FanimeCon. It's like the one convention I go to every year. But we went to San Jose because San Jose has 2 branches or 2 locations of what may be one of the best secondhand stores ever, named Savers. There's 2 locations of Savers in San Jose, and we went to both of them. Now you may be thinking, Max, why do I care about a secondhand shop? And, well, first and foremost, everybody loves deals. Everybody loves to make the most out of money and also time. We were away from our place. We were real far away. We thought, let's hit Savers. Let's do the double Savers. And we came out with so many amazing grabs. We're talking about Blakesworth snatching a real leather jacket. Like real leather brand jacket. $7. Of course, Kitty purchased a lot of plushies, we managed to find a bag with like 12 Joshi plushies and an original 90s fat Pikachu, aka Best Pikachu. And of course, what did you think? What did you think I got from a secondhand store? Books. Books, books, books. I was hoping I would find some Roger Zelazny, cause like his stuff has never been reprinted. I have like a copy of like Lord of Light that I managed to find in my local store, but unfortunately, I found no Roger Zelazny. Instead, I managed to finally snatch some older books. I don't want to use the word classical because they're not classical. What I mean is that I got some books that I never got to read when I was younger because I moved to the US when I was 14 years old. And Kitty was kind of picking through them. I ended up grabbing some J.D. Salinger stuff that I'd never read in the past. Am I saying that right? J.D. Salinger? J.D. Salinger. I ended up getting a collection of short stories, one of which is A Perfect Day for Banana Fish, which is a joke for like 3 people who know me. Yeah, A Perfect Day for Banana Fish. And I also got The Catcher in the Rye, which I had never read. And Kitty wanted me to read The Catcher in the Rye because, in her own words, it was a very polarizing book for her. You either hated it or you loved it. And about 5 pages in of reading it, I'm like, I understand why teenagers hated this book. The story, I mean, I've read like 25 pages. This is not a review. It's like, I mean, benefit of the doubt, you know? The book is not triggering any red flags for me yet, but I mean, who knows how the story will develop. I do totally, like, the instant I started reading the narration, I imagined a New York accent, and everything clicked in place. Because I'm reading it, I'm like, is this guy from New York? Because it feels as though it's a person from New York just talking to you. And I've enjoyed the narration. The one thing, and the reason I'm bringing it up, in page 18 of The Catcher in the Rye, there is a quote about writing that I had heard forever, and just until last night I realized it's from The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. What really knocks me out is a book that, when you're all done reading it, you wish the author that wrote it was a terrific friend of yours, and you could call him up on the phone whenever you felt like it. That's a quote that I'd read forever, and it was nice stumbling on it without realizing it. I'm going to be reading that book in my off time. I don't know if it's good. Might not be. It might be. I don't know. Kitty liked it growing up, and I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. So far, it's not, making me... How do I say this? I read 2 really bad books. Okay, I read 1 bad book. I didn't finish the second one. I knew I wasn't going to finish that book that I started because I was dreading, like, it's at the bottom of a pile right now. And I don't think I'm going to finish reading it because it was just so dreadful. I don't imagine myself ever finishing that book. I might just toss it out so I don't have to look at it ever again. It was really disappointing, and I'm at least pleased that I have read 25 pages of The Catcher in the Rye without just going, oh my god, so many inconsistencies. Oh my god, so many negative statements. That's a thing. I know that I'm going long on my week for it, but a dear viewer wanted me to actually go in detail as to what those books did that I hated so much. And you know what? This is not in the schedule. This is not in the plan for today. But let's just go in. I'm not going to tell you the title of the book that I read. Well, the 2 books that I read that were terrible, because this is an inspiration podcast. But I'm going to give you an example of something that is like a small piece of bad writing that people do without realizing it, and your editor should yell at you for this. Or alternatively, you should yell at yourself for this. Don't allow yourself to do stuff like this without realizing it. I'm going to read you a segment from this book. I'll change the name of the protagonist. John wasn't good at relying on people, but he wasn't bad at being relied on by others. Period. Just because he wasn't bad at it didn't mean it didn't hurt. Let's read that one more time. John wasn't good at relying on people, but he wasn't bad at being relied on by others. Period. Just because he wasn't bad at it, it didn't mean it didn't hurt. Negative statements are this puzzle that the reader has to assemble and reassemble live as they are reading the story. I would like to inspire you, instead of having negative statements or the dreadful double negative statement, to just rephrase them to make them clear. John was bad at relying on people, but he was good at being relied on by others. Wow! It's crazy how when you don't have your sentences be all negative or double negative based, suddenly the reader can understand what you said without having to solve, a puzzle live on. Can you guys hear that? Can you guys hear my cat wanting in? Let me go get him. Oh my god, this baby. Yanto! Everybody, Yanto's here! Everybody say hi to Yanto. Hey Yanto, wanna say hi to the viewers? And then he knocked over a small pile of books, which happened to be the small pile of books that we purchased at Savers. Other stuff that we purchased, I had also never read The Lord of the Flies, so I will be reading through that next, hopefully. And we also got our hands on a really pristine, kind of, how do I even describe this? It's, you know what, I'm just going to pick it up from the pile. Okay, so it's a softcover back of the original Ghost in the Shell bilingual edition, and I know that it's the complete, first arc of Ghost in the Shell, because it literally ends where the movie ends. And I mean the original movie, not the American remake. And it's it's got color pages tossed in between, and it's gory as hell. So I'm looking forward to reading, because I've seen the original animated movie, or anime movie, excuse me. But I never actually read the manga, so I'll be reading through that as well. Oh, and the other thing that I also forgot to slightly bring up before I was rudely interrupted by my lovely cat. The book that I don't know if you heard me tossing across the room. It was full of negative statements like that, or double negative statements like that, which made reading the story a problem, but it also had these moments in narration in which it would tell you a detail about the main character that would give you character, but it would also, it wasn't an absolutely 100% positive trait, so the writer would backspace, basically, or would backstep, and as we say in the biz, he would walk it back. So we would have situations where, John hated being around crowds. And I'm like, oh, that's a piece of character. Oh, I'm learning stuff about him. He doesn't like being in crowds. But immediately, next sentence, the writer would walk it back and say, oh, but he would do just fine in crowds because he knew it was part of life, so he dealt with it. And I'm like, writer person, you have told me nothing about this character. Every time you tell me something that might give him character, you walk it back. He really valued his friends, and they meant a lot to him. But he couldn't tell them, because that would just be awkward. That is an actual paraphrased line from that book. And it's just like, every time I felt like I wanted to get close to the main character and understand their struggle and where they came from, every single time the narrator or the narrator/writer was like, yeah, but not too close though. There's I felt like there was a sheet, a 1-inch sheet of glass between me and the main character, and I could just never get any feeling for how they were like. Alright. Anyhow, all that stuff out of the way. My week? Did I get any editing done this week? No, because I was busy all over the place. Also, that trip took way longer and took way more of my time than I thought it was going to. And in between recording stuff for my other channel, and personal life stuffs, and running all over the place, I'm recording this earlier just because I want to get it done. Tomorrow, get back to editing, and there's one more pass I gotta do on this novel, and then it's going off to my beta readers. That is terrifying, but it is also liberating. I am looking forward to the fear that I know I am going to feel when I send it to them and it is off my hands and I can't change anything anymore. but I am also looking forward to working on something else. Probably that book I wrote about giant robots. That seems like a good start. But before any of that stuff, let's talk about the sponsors for this show. Omakase is brought to you thanks to you! Lovely people like you who are supporting this show on Patreon. Patreon.com/mkaren is the #1 place to support me and what I do. By pledging just $1, just $1 a month, you get to listen to these podcasts a week before they go live on YouTube, and many more perks. As a matter of fact, all of my $1 and up patrons get a shout out at the end of the podcast. If you pledge a little bit more though, I give you a shout out right here in the middle of the podcast. I just have to because these are some of the most generous patrons I have, and I can't help but give them a shout out. First off, we have Atlac. Atlac has a DeviantArt page. You can learn more about their writing and their art over at deviantart.com/AHTILAK. Also, a big shout out to Isabella Doucette. Isabella Doucette writes LGBT plus positive novels, and you can find them on smashwords.com. You can do a search for Isabella Doucette or find them under the username ILMTDOUCETTE. And now, a shout out to the rest of my lovely, most generous patrons. A. Howard, Alisa Dudley, Amelia, Angela, Brenda, Lishadra, Gilbert Gaudreau, Irina Phoenix, Lazy, I love Lazy, Mark Maruska, Nicola, Pat Eichson, Polly Craftwell, Soul Muse, and Synexia. Alright, and now let's move over to the second segment of the show, viewer questions. If you have a question you would like me to feature on the show, feel free to tweet it at me, at Mr. Karen on Twitter, or just leave it in the comments of the video version of this podcast. I am actually catching up with the questions, the big pile of questions that I've been getting over a while, so this is a great time to send a question my way. The first question of the day is about sensitive subjects in fiction. A dear viewer wanted my advice, my pointers, my tips in regards to handling sensitive subjects in their stories. The particular one they mentioned was suicide. Don't worry. I'm not putting a trigger warning ahead of everything because we're gonna have a very surface conversation of sensitive topics in general. When it comes to sensitive subjects in media, my advice is to first and foremost not use them for shock value, and to be mindful of what the story and what the characters are ultimately saying through this part of the story. There is a great example of a bad example. As I've said, life is too short for you to make all the mistakes. It's best to learn from someone else's mistakes. There is a story, and a few of you may recognize it just from the examples I'm about to list, but there's a story in which the main female character attempts suicide several times throughout the story, and every time it's used for shock value. It's meant to shock the reader/player, wink wink, and be this dramatic moment without really any setup, without really any explanation, and both times the resolution of that is very unsatisfying, because instead of talking about what horrible thing almost just happened, the writing and the story immediately divert back to something much more interesting. The next beat for the next story element. and one may consider those parts of the story to be isolated accidents, except that at the climax of this story, the main antagonist achieves their goal by ceasing to be alive, and the story never stops to acknowledge how, for a lack of better words, the antagonist wins and gets everything they want, and wins at the end by, killing himself. And quite baffled at how, no one involved with the production of this story stopped to go, are we saying that it's a good idea to do this? Are we saying that this is a good way to solve your problems? What are we saying with the conclusion of this story? It doesn't appear like a collection of isolated accidents, but rather like a really incoherent narrative. Like I said at the start, are you using this sensitive subject, whether it is suicide, whether it is police brutality, whether it is racism in America, are you using this as something for shock value? A quick way to get a jump from the reader? Or are you actually saying something about it? And more importantly, what is it that you are saying? And, to put it bluntly, are you saying something meaningful? Those of you who follow me on Twitter might have noticed the rant that I put up regarding a certain game that uses racism for just shock value without saying anything. And I heard feedback online saying that, the game is saying that racism is bad, which it wasn't saying that actively throughout the narrative. It never stops and says that. And even if they had been purposefully writing the story to be about that, I don't particularly think that the message, yeah, racism is bad, is one that is particularly meaningful, because, yeah, racism is a bad thing. In retrospect, I'm realizing that I actually talked about something like this a while back. I did. The first Omakase extra, or Omakase bonus, was about the 3 bad writers I met in college, in all my creative writing classes. And one of them actually wrote, I'm gonna overlook the first part of that story for the sake of being clear on this. But that story was centered around the main character wanting to commit suicide, and it was done for shock value. It was done to kind of be dramatic and not so much saying anything about the subject matter. It felt gratuitous. And once again, what is the definition of gratuity? For free, or without any seemingly good reason to be there. I feel that every time I have this conversation, every time I bring up sensitive subjects in media, I always get 2 people who just want to get muted in the comments and are always like, this is the problem with, PC culture, etc., etc. Which, that's silly, because I think it's important to be considerate of other people. It's also very important as writers to be mindful of what we're actually saying. Because I assume you care about what you're saying. I assume that words are important to you, and meaning is important to you. The same way you want to make sure that everybody's clear on what's happening to your main character and who they are and what they believe in. I think it is equally important to be mindful of what we're saying. Not just so that our meaning is clear and that those who read our stories understand what we tried to say. They may not always get everything, but they can emerge from the story understanding the words we put on the page and the relation to one another. But also to be mindful of those who have experienced those things and been there, because it feels bad and it feels heartless to use a person's struggles for the sake of shock value. if it is meaningful for the story, and you're saying something meaningful about it, then I think it is absolutely welcomed. But if you're using it for quick thrills, for a quick moment of drama in the story that is never referenced ever again, ultimately that's not good writing. And it's not good writing because you're writing about a sensitive subject. It's not good writing because you're going for a quick fix. I want you to feel sorry for a character, so they're going to attempt suicide. That's your plan? That's how you're going to make the readers care for your character? It's quick, it's dirty, it's done for shock value, it's gratuitous. Can you make me care about your character in a different way? Can you make me care for their dreams, for their hopes, for their passions? Can you make me care for what they care for? Can you make me understand them so that I feel and I empathize with them? That right there is the thing that I find more meaningful as someone who has dealt with family members and their suicide. I can assure you, I care very much more that you tell me an effective story, that you make me care for that character, than just dropping suicide as a kind of hand wave for drama and shock. Oh man, I got so serious there for a second. But it's a thing, like, I feel like I have to clarify it, because when I say that, I always get 2 or 3 people who are about to get muted for my comments ever again, who complain about PC culture. And it isn't all about being respectful and mindful towards other people, which I never really realized that was like a weird thing to say. You know, I want to be mindful of what other people feel. But you know, it's the internet. People think I'm not reading the comments, and then they get banished to the Shadow Realm, and then, you know, you never hear from them ever again. But more important than that is the reality of what we're saying in fiction, and what we're actually ultimately saying. What is the ultimate message of our story? I'm writing a story about a sensitive topic, and I'm tackling it in the best way that I can. And I've had sleepless nights, staying up, looking at the ceiling, unable to sleep, thinking, wondering, tossing, turning about the ultimate message of my story. What am I saying about this awful, awful topic? What am I really saying? And it's taken a lot of work. And I think I've nailed it, but maybe I haven't. The beta readers will point that out to me. They will call me out on it. And if anything, that's the thing I'm the most terrified about. I am terrified that I've put all this work and I've overlooked one part of the story, where my meaning gets tarnished, where the reader loses faith in the ultimate point of the story and the ultimate message that I'm conveying through it. That's hard work. That's why writing isn't easy. That's why this here, the ultimate message of the story, is down there in the deep, deep layers. Because everybody thinks about writing the story, and they soon learn that revising it is its own different beast. And after making sure the story sounds and reads well, and, you know, everything makes sense, and everything is established well before it actually comes into action, and the story rings and echoes and rhymes. And after that, you actually have to consider the meaning of your story, what you're actually saying, what characters are actually saying. That may or may not have been the reason why I changed every piece of dialogue spoken by the antagonist, because I realized what I wanted to say and what she was saying were not clicking. But that right there is the struggle. That right there is what we do. That right there is why we show up to the blank page and we give it our best. So, I went long on this one, but I had to get it off my chest. I don't like to beat around the bush. You know me. I show up here in front of the microphone and I try to be as honest as possible. And if I literally just explain to you my feelings and you still feel, if you still feel compelled to leave one of those really, really shallow comments, I'll just ban you to the Shadow Realm. This is the contract. Additional to that, dear reader who sent the question, if you really feel the story requires this element make sure that you're not using it just for shock value, and be mindful of what you're saying. Alright, well that question went long. It's the thing where I wrote my little notes here on my 3" by 3" piece of paper that I usually use for writing the guide for the show. And I'm like, this is probably gonna go long, and turns out Max from the future, or Max from the past, who wrote this, was right. Let's move over to the second question of the day. A quicker question, really. A dear viewer asked me, a certain fan who happens to be a lover of chocolate, sorry for getting to this question a little bit late than I meant, wanted to know about my feelings in regards to whether you, as a new writer, should focus on improving your writing or improving your editing skill. To be entirely honest, I do, although I do not 100% agree with it, I do see where people come from with particular questions like this. Especially if you are encountering editing for the first time, because editing is not the same process as writing. Writing, to me, if I had to describe it, the act of writing is a lot like trying to catch butterflies with your hands. You reach out into the air and just snatch them, and and hopefully you do not crush them, and you bring them to you. You reach out and you grab them, as though reaching for words and finding the correct ones and placing them on the page or in your collection or wherever you put butterflies. Catching things from the air. Writing feels a lot like reaching into this ether, this other external force, and and translating those thoughts, the images that I see, the characters that I hear, the story that I witness, translating it into words. It's a very, one could say, one-sided experience. I focus on the story and nothing else. I take from that vision, I translate it, I move on. Word by word, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, and next thing you know, a couple weeks later, a couple months later, the book is over. Revision doesn't work like that. Revision, to me, feels a lot more... I mean, okay, if I get to revise my original description, because I realized catching butterflies sounds dumb, it's a lot more like actually making clay. There you go. I am this close. If I had more time today, I would go back and I would reshoot that part of the podcast. But guess what? That's the part you get now. You get to imagine me catching butterflies. But imagine making clay, like actually getting dirt, getting water, and mixing them together, and moving the clay to a table or something. Gathering clay. Every single word, every paragraph, every page, a handful of clay. And then you have this mount, and you think to yourself, that the first draft is all the work, but it isn't. The biggest part of the work, the one that is most intensive, because writing a book takes the longest, at least in my experience. Writing the book takes more time, but it takes to me more energy to edit because it's more active. It's not just me catching, it's not just me mixing water and dirt and making clay. I've got this table. Imagine the table and all this clay, and it is time to mold it into something, to finally give it form. And much like one would begin with a statue or with a vase, we begin at the bottom, at the beginning of the story, and we give it shape and we clean it. We review our mistakes, our misspellings, our typos, our sentence structure. And little by little, we give the story form. Writing and editing are different processes, and I completely get that. And I completely understand that. The part where I don't fully agree is that they are ultimately two independent skills. I think there is a lot of cross-pollination. there's a lot... I almost feel... Okay, I think that instead of imagining it as two skills in your skills bar or in your character menu, imagine instead a Venn diagram. two circles overlapping at one point. The circle on the left labeled writing, the circle on the right labeled editing, and the point in which they collide, they combine each other, that segment of the Venn diagram is known as telling a story, making a book, creating a novel. You require both. And parts of the skills that you learn from one can help you another. And there's also something to be said about the nature of experiencing media, which might be another part of the circle, really. An additional circle that says consuming media, reading books, watching movies, playing games, experiencing other stories, learning from what makes them effective, and learning from what makes them ineffective. Taking the good and trying to not take the bad along with it. So, I mean, if we were to be reductive and, explain writing as a collection, or creating a novel as a collection of skills, it would be writing, editing, and consuming media. Because consuming media is as important as the other two. Being aware of what other writers do, what makes it effective and what doesn't, it helps. Like, listen, nothing reminded me how ineffective negative statements are than reading that bad novel where every other sentence I'm like disarming a puzzle, trying to understand what the writer is actually saying. That's a good reminder of staying away from negative statements. But back to the question. Should you focus on one skill over the others? Is it more important to focus on writing first or focus on editing first? And honestly, being really, really sincere with you, I don't think it's as big of a deal as one may think. I think, because I understand where this fear is coming from. At least I know where that fear came from when I was a younger writer, and I would find myself thinking of stuff like this. And in my heart, I feel that the fear comes from not wanting to make a mistake, not wanting to make a bad story, not wanting to do that thing that people tell you that everybody hates, where they tell you that the very first book you write is going to be bad. And I don't agree with that sentence, because I don't think the first book you write has to be bad. But I do think that the next book you write will be better than the last. I believe strongly, and I will defend that with my life, because I think that if you are actively consuming media and writing and giving editing your all, you are improving and you're moving forward. And it's not a matter of one skill is going to get better than the others, but I feel all of them are intertwined within that Venn diagram. They're all part of the same system, and they all move forward. And ultimately, being honest, it doesn't so much matter how high your editing skill is if you're not editing right now. Write books, edit them, consume other media, rinse, repeat. Okay? Okay. I've gone really long on all these two questions, so now let's move over to the final segment of the show, the prompt. It is time for that segment of the show where we forget about my week, forget about writing questions and answers, and instead focus on the creative process. Every week, I try to give you a little prompt or some sort of creative exercise to help you think about stories. Because it is important to continue to be creatively fueled, to think about our stories, to imagine our characters, and to be open and welcoming to the ideas out there in the ether. It is not so much that writers are more able to find stories in the wild as much as it is that we are more aware to them. We're more open to finding them. That is why I joke every once in a while that at first you think that your story ideas are each individual and special, and they are, but they are not unique. I joke in the past that all you need is to flip, like, once you've been writing books for a while, you flip over a rock and there's 2 story ideas in there somewhere. And that's not inherently a bash on your, original story ideas, but it is a point to reflect on just how good we are when we're open to story ideas, open to discovering things out there. When we have our mind open, we find things. When we ask things of the universe, sometimes we get them. And stories are one of them. Elements for our story ideas are one of them as well. I want you to be open and to think today about your characters. Today's prompt is titled, We Need to Talk. Communication is important to all aspects of life and all relationships. And today, we're gonna force 2 of our characters to sit down and talk. Throughout stories, our characters are busy doing stuff, going somewhere, getting some things done, and there's seldom time to just sit down and reflect. Today, I want you to take the main character of your current project. I want you to take them and put them somewhere where they finally have 5 minutes to breathe. It may be the barracks in the hours leading to the final advance against the enemy forces. It can be in the room the night before the big game. It can be a handful of minutes at a coffee shop before the big heist. A moment of peace before the next move. It may not be the final move, but you know how wandering minds can be the night before an event. How final things can be and feel. I love diners. There is a particular aesthetic to diners that I love and I come back to in stories. So when I think of this prompt, I imagine one of my characters. I'm imagining an American diner. Wide glass windows. Looking out to a parking lot. Maybe in the suburbs, maybe in the middle of nowhere. Desert stretching as far as the eye can see. The booth of a diner with its squeaky plastic-like seats. Waitress and cooks shouting orders and questions to each other in the background. The clinking of plates and silverware. The distant sound of the jukebox playing some old song. And there, trying to enjoy breakfast, is the protagonist. I'm imagining the main character from the book I'm writing. And I want you to imagine the character from your story. They don't have to be in a diner, but if you want to play along, I would like that. I imagine that food's been ordered. We have that silence once food has finally arrived and we're shoving our faces full of food. There's silence. There's hardly a reason to talk. But as the food on the plate begins to dwindle down, as food and sugars finally hit our bloodstream, the silence becomes heavier and words return. Imagine your protagonist sitting in that booth, half finished with the plate of whatever they ordered. I imagine my character would order something practical or something classic. I imagine it being early in the day, because you either go to a diner early in the day or late at night. And I think early in the day. I'm thinking breakfast. I'm thinking something classic. 2 eggs and hash browns. She's a very practical girl. Oh, no, 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 no. Belgian waffles, black coffee. That's the one. That's the one. And sitting across from our protagonist is someone very important to this story. I don't want to say the antagonist, but it could be the antagonist. I want you to put on the other booth the second most important person in your story. Someone they might never get a chance to talk to. Someone they might have never gotten the chance to talk to. Or someone they wish they could just share one last meal with. I want you to imagine that other person. I am imagining a very specific person for my story. She is also very practical. But she enjoys the finer things in life. Like a greasy, 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 dirty burger. It's 8 a.m. She's eating a burger. I believe it. It's the only way. A part of me wants to believe that she would also be drinking a shake. But let's be real. She's getting a Coke. A part of me is like, add more flair. No, that girl wants a Coke, and that's what it is. And they're eating breakfast. And it's time. Your protagonist and the second most important person in your story. It's time we have a talk. I want you to imagine in your mind or on the page. This is great. This is a great exercise to just get thoughts out of your head. If this is the only time they get to talk with one another. If this is the only time they get to share before whatever follows next. If you got to say what really is inside of their mind, what would the conversation be? Who would speak first? Who would break the silence? Who would put their fork and knife down? Or who would put their burger down? Take a sip from their drink. Sigh. And say, I know what you brought me here. Isn't there something you wanted to say? How would the conversation follow? It's so hard for us to talk about what we really want to talk about. There are layers and countless possibilities trapped inside. I'm okay. But I think the resounding agreement is that you're not. Seldom are we really okay when we say we're okay. More often than not, we shove those words inside of us and we relive them at the bottom of the night. We wish we have gotten the chance to say something. We wish we had said something else. We wish that we had just handled things differently. Your character now has the chance. They both do. They can finally say what they really mean. Get it off their chests. This conversation needs not be canon, but I do appreciate tackling it seriously. Imagining not only what they would really say, but how they would say it, and how it would affect the other person. It is not so much because dialogue is very important, and a part of writing that you should become acquainted with, but also because honesty and sincerity through the speech of our characters is one of the most delightful parts of writing. The moment when a character speaks and you know that everything they've just said is true. And not just that, but that it rings true with who they are. And it echoes with everything they've said. And it rhymes with their actions and their choices. And you know, sometimes without a dialogue tag, that they said it, and only they could have said it. Imagine your protagonist sitting at the barracks in their apartment in the last few minutes before the big heist. At that diner, their breakfast half finished, or half started. Their drink getting cold or getting warm. As the second most important person to the story, who may just be the most important person in their life, asks them a question. Entire stories can be built leading up to a moment like that. A moment when our characters finally sit down and speak honestly, candidly to one another, with words as bright as light and as painful as torture. What does your character have to say to this person? If they got the chance to tell them one last thing, if they had the chance to finally say it, if they got to say goodbye, if they got to say those 3 painful little words, if they opened their heart, bared their soul with a handful of words, what would they say? Man, I love that exercise. That exercise is just so fun. I could write entire stories leading up to that moment. Entire novels leading to the moment when characters sit down and finally say it. Ah, so good. So good. Ah. I guess that was kind of what Masks of Glass was about, except that's a really, really short novella. But it's just that moment when characters finally speak, and they speak truthfully. I love writing. Writing is so good. Alright. Hi there. Welcome to Omakase, episode 17. I'm your host, Kieran. I want to thank you for tagging along. I hope you had fun today. And I hope that you go out there, go back into the real world, and you keep telling stories. Get back to writing. November's coming up. Get back to editing. And get back to doing what you do best. Okay? Okay. And now, we're about to move over to the final segment of the show, the secret segment. The end of the video club, where we stay until the end of the video. I want to give shoutouts to every single lovely person who donates to me through Patreon and who treats me to a cup of coffee. We have no new cups of coffee this week, but that's okay. We will be shouting every single lovely Patreon pledging $1 and up every single month to my Patreon page, patreon.com/mkieran. Last week I read them in reverse order, and that was way too weird. So we're back to alphabetical A to Z, beginning with A. Howard, Atlac, Alistair Baywood, Elisa Dudley, Amanda Stevens, Amelia, Amy Palmer, Angela, Aniexo Hoshi, Biting the Sun, Blarg, Brenda, C.E. Richards, Caitlin, and the other Caitlin, Carriette Eccleston, Kathy Lindsay, Lishadra, Christiane, Christine Dennis, Kristen Lofton, Clem Pastor, Dwayne Jackson, Eleanor, Arasos. Hold on a minute. Okay, for a second, I thought it was a new patron, but I can tell from how long you've been pledging that you changed your name. So, I don't know who you were before, but now I will shout you out formally as Joffrey Raby. Was it Raby? I always thought it was Raby. I think it's Raby, isn't it? Oh no, I've done it again. Oh no. I'm gonna go with my gut feeling and say that's Raby. Gilbert Gaudreau, Irina Phoenix, Isabella Doucette, Janosch Hebatsky, Jaytana Kirkwood, Jeffrey James Williams, Juan Nunes, K.M. Anderson, Kamershwar Rao Shaluri, Kaylee, Kiel, Kitley, Lazy, Lear Killo, M.T. Lucatelli, Mark Maruska, Mary Foster Smith, Nicola, Nicole Grissom, Nicolay. Hold on. Hold your horses. Nicolay changed their icon. I need to know what this is. Nicolay changed their icon to, ooh, a really cool looking eye. That's cool. That's cool. You think I don't notice these things? Of course I notice these things. I'm all made about noticing little details. I've been editing for like a month. Of course I notice little details. Noam Sahar, Novels and Tomes, Pablo, Pat Eitson, Polly Craftwall, Raquel Fernandez, Roa, Shimmer Tales, Sky, D. White, Soul Muse, Sylvia Leitilla, Synexia, and Wendy Christopher. And there we go. Another episode done and done. I hope you had fun. This is the thing where, how do I say this? A part of me, sometimes I wonder, and sometimes I worry, because I'm really good at worrying, about the podcast and what I'm putting forward. But every time I remind myself of the promise that I made when I first began this journey, and particularly the promise of Omakase, a podcast about me, a podcast the best podcast I could make, filled with my story, my experience, my journey, my writing advice, my honest opinion, my sincere thoughts, a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of a creative push, and here we go. I hope you had fun. And I hope that if anything, I was good company for the last hour and so. I hope you go out there to the real world, you get the work done that you need to get done, you do those scary things, you go out into the unknown, and that you get back to writing.